Hello, colleagues from across the country. We even some from across the world. My name is Inger Stark, and I am part of the Peralta Online Equity team that organizes this conference. Thank you so much for being here, particularly if you're from California, super early in the morning. A couple of logistics. I want to let you know that if you want captions, the caption feature is turned on in this Zoom, and therefore at the bottom of the Zoom, you can just toggle the on off. We are being recorded. And I encourage you to participate in the chat. We don't ask our presenters to monitor them closely, but I will be attending the whole session. I'm excited about the topic, and I'll watch the chat and make notes in case there's anything really significant that you'd like the presenter to know at the end. And with that, I would like to introduce to you Angela Pashia, and from University of West Georgia, correct? Yes, and give the floor over to you.
Thank you. Let me go ahead and start sharing. Start sharing my presentation.
And because I gave such a very brief introduction, maybe, let people know a little about yourself.
So let me move this bar so I can get to my other stuff. So good morning. Starting off, I'm here to talk today about coaching educators toward more equitable practices. So we've been discussing the need to make our pedagogy more equitable for decades now. Some faculty have embraced the call, seeking opportunities to learn more and actively implementing new strategies to improve equity in their online teaching. If we picture those faculty at one end of a continuum, we have folks at the other end who are just never going to make any changes to their teaching. Maybe they don't believe there's a need to change. Maybe they're just checked out and coasting until retirement. Maybe there are other reasons, but they are just never going to do anything more than what is required by the administration. And then we have a bunch of people somewhere in the middle. They see value in more equitable teaching practices, but struggle somewhere. Maybe they just haven't been able to prioritize making time to learn a new teaching strategy. Maybe they're afraid of making a mistake. Maybe they've made a few changes and want to do more, but have hit a plateau. For whatever reason, they're just hanging out in the middle. They have the desire that makes it easy to tip them over into that group of educators who do continually improve their teaching to be more equitable, but they need something that they haven't gotten yet to support them in taking action. So, to share a little bit about me, I've been a faculty librarian at a regional comprehensive university for over a decade now. I've been active on several committees across campus dealing with diversity and inclusion and equity issues, including like faculty senate work. So that means a lot of conversations with faculty across campus about equity issues. I also teach a professional development course for librarians on equity issues in the library, getting into understanding how structural racism shows up in pretty much everything we do. And then last year, I enrolled in a training program to become a professional coach. Coaching currently is a completely unregulated industry, which means there's no one definitive definition of what a coach is. So I'll take a few minutes to explain what I mean when I talk about coaching, which is not necessarily what everyone is going to mean. So I'm assuming most of us have heard of a coach in relation to athletics, right? That's where the term originated. a person who works with an individual athlete or a team to help them improve their performance in that sport. My image is the little league coach teaching a child the right way to hold a baseball bat, when to swing, and when to let that foul ball fly right by. Even there, though, we have a range of approaches, from the kind supportive teacher to the angry person shouting like the TV image of a drill sergeant. Eventually, that idea of focused support on helping an individual or team improve their performance was extrapolated beyond sports to other areas of life: management, leadership, teaching skills, relationships, and just any kind of general life coaching on any topic. If you've seen the first season of Ted Lasso on Apple TV, or even just the memes about Ted Lasso, my viewing of that is he is a life coach who happened to stumble into coaching a sports team. He was hired to coach a sports team with no prior knowledge of the sport he's coaching, but had several early successes by focusing on improving the interpersonal dynamics among team members and supporting individual team members in their personal growth. So, despite the wide range of approaches and definitions out there, there are a couple of professional organizations that are trying to establish a clear definition and set of standards, so you know what you're getting when you work with a professional coach. The biggest and most well-known of these organizations is the International Coaching Federation, or ICF. They define coaching as partnering with clients in a thought-provoking and creative process that inspires them to maximize their personal and professional potential. That's super clear and specific, right? For me, when I first read it, it didn't really clear anything up. It's intentionally pretty open because what exactly it entails depends on what the client wants to work on and what obstacles they're facing. It's basically focusing on asking the right questions to help the clients take their reflective practice to another level. And implicit in that is my assumption that we already have support for faculty to be reflective practitioners, even if that's more in theory than in material support. Reflection is an important part of a cycle of continuous improvement as you reflect on what worked, what didn't, where you could have done things differently, etc. A coach then partners with the educator, and as the educator or the client shares their reflections, the coach asks thought-provoking questions that help dig a little bit deeper to explore what might be under that initial reaction or see things from another perspective. The coach might also share an observation like, I noticed that your body language seemed to shift when you said this thing. What's behind that? And that also helps to kind of dig a little deeper below the surface of that initial reflection. This approach is really effective for working to move past challenges so that you can take your performance to another level. Another way of thinking about what coaching is to contrast it with what it's not according to this definition. My ICF training program outlines a few key distinctions. First, coaching versus mentoring. Mentoring is a framework in which a more experienced practitioner is matched up with a less experienced practitioner in that specific skill or field. Of course, a good mentoring relationship is mutual, with both parties learning from the other. The foundation of that pairing assumes knowledge transfer from one to the other. The more experienced mentor shares their experiences and what they've learned about navigating that institution, the profession, or that particular skill set, helping the less experienced mentee learn the ropes. In contrast, coaching starts with a focus on what the client already knows. Coaches have expertise in listening to what you really want, asking questions to clarify your thinking, and helping you establish what you want to accomplish. This may include identifying a knowledge gap and exploring how the client can take agency in identifying a mentor to work with or an effective training opportunity to help them gain the knowledge that they need. So it's not one is better than the other, it's just different focuses in the different types of sessions. Some practicing coaches blend these two approaches, but ICF standards make a clear distinction. So coaching versus counseling or therapy. The simplified version here is counseling focuses on healing the past, whereas coaching focuses on moving forward. Of course, healing the past helps you move forward intentionally instead of just repeating past cycles, but it involves a lot of time exploring the source of the issue and past experiences in order to heal that past wound. Coaching can involve exploration of what's below the surface of an issue, but with a focus on what's going on now so that we can find a way to move differently in the future. And these are also complementary, and a past client came to me because their therapist recommended that they also work with a coach. And then looking at coaching versus consulting. A consultant is hired for their expertise in a specific area to do a specific thing, do an analysis, and provide specific recommendations generally. The consultant tells you what to do. The coach asks you questions to help you figure out what you want to do. So, what does all of this have to do with equitable teaching practices? Like I said at the very beginning, coaching can be an incredibly valuable support for faculty who are in the middle. The ones that want to do more, but have not yet made significant changes. I described a couple of scenarios that kind of foreshadow my assumptions about why some faculty are not making these changes. Largely a lack of confidence and not enough time. Those are my biases based on working with faculty across campus, but we can also turn to published research at this point. So Addy et al. Published an article in 2021 reporting on a survey of faculty asking for their perceptions of the barriers that have gotten in the way of implementing more equitable teaching practices on their campuses, both for themselves and their colleagues. The authors analyzed the responses and categorized them into two pools: personal barriers and institutional barriers. I highlight the personal barriers here because that's where coaching can be an effective tool. Without institutional support, coaching individual faculty members won't make that much of a difference and may even be seen as a waste of time. Getting that institutional support is an important first step to be able to build more supports around campus. So looking at these, lack of awareness here includes both a perception that other faculty are not aware of a need to do anything differently, and then a sense that some faculty are not aware of how to implement more inclusive teaching practices. So this is where you have the white faculty that are operating from a position of privilege and have not stepped out of that bubble yet to recognize that there is a need for more inclusive practices. Fear is a stronger way of saying a lack of confidence in one's ability to implement effective changes. Unwillingness to change and not feeling responsible are challenges that are less coachable issues. For coaching to be effective, you have to want to make a change. So looking at this, the fear is the most coachable issue. And then just not knowing how to implement more inclusive teaching practices that suggests a need for additional training, but that could also connect with the fear. In the list of institutional barriers, they mentioned time pressures, with a focus on the institution demanding more and more from faculty. While coaching doesn't change institutional demands, it can provide support for faculty who are ready to pause, regain clarity on their priorities, and work on strategies to prioritize those things they most value. So this may include working on strategies for saying no to yet another committee assignment, or backing away from time spent on one of those committees that just never seems to actually accomplish anything, in order to create space to work on implementing more equitable teaching strategies. It's also worth noting here that coaching was mentioned specifically in a couple of the representative comments from the survey as a recommended intervention. So where will coaching be most effective? I want to make my teaching more equitable, but I'm afraid of messing up. This, honestly, as a white woman who had to work through this at one stage of my development, this is a very coachable topic. A coach can help this person work through identifying what's below that fear to address it on all levels, and then figure out how to build strategies to move forward. Of course, what that entails depends on where each individual is starting from. They may need to start with identifying ways to learn more. They may need to work on chunking the problem into smaller steps so that it's not a huge, overwhelming challenge, and start implementing new strategies while they work on building their knowledge in other areas. I have all these great ideas from the conferences I attend, but I can never find time to do anything with them. This one is also familiar to me, and it's another very coachable topic, but may come with a different approach. So it touches on that institutional problem of demands on our time. So that may involve more time working on getting clear on priorities and figuring out strategies for establishing boundaries around those priorities. Of course, there are always institutional demands that you just have no choice about, but a coach can help you work through what really has to be done and what you can at least approach a discussion about taking off of your plate. And realistically, this obstacle may also be a surface excuse covering up some of the fears that are more on the surface in the previous scenario. In which case the coaching may start out with managing demands and wind up drilling down into addressing those fears that have prevented the educator from making time to try out these new strategies. So to reiterate, some of the really key benefits of coaching in this space include building awareness and self-efficacy. I'm assuming that many of you are at this presentation because you sought out more opportunities to learn about equitable teaching. Those who lack awareness of the need for more equitable teaching don't have the motivation needed to create change in this area. And they're only going to engage in those trainings that the university says this is required annual refresher training. But those who just don't know how to take their first step can benefit from coaching that supports them in becoming more like those of us that are here and identifying opportunities to learn more, creating space for attending those trainings, and working on implementation strategies. There are also coaches that specifically focus on building understanding of diversity, equity, and inclusion issues. So if you have that white colleague who just read their first book on how to be a white ally, and now they're going to the disproportionately few BIPOC members of your faculty, expecting them to do the emotional labor of supporting their learning, this is an excellent opportunity to hire a coach to help this person work through the process of learning so that we're not placing extra demands on faculty who are already overburdened dealing with institutional micro and macro aggressions. Coaching can also help faculty in building their confidence and building a plan to actually put these new strategies into practice. We can also frame coaching as helping to build career capital in those who are further along and just need support to manage their workloads so that they can move to the next level. Coaching creates space to clarify your priorities, establish boundaries to protect space for those priorities. Of course, again, that's only relevant here if we assume that developing more equitable teaching practices is one of those priorities. And then strategize communication with colleagues and administrators around those priorities and boundaries. So how do you incorporate coaching as professional development? Coaching can make a significant contribution to supporting those faculty who are in the middle of that spectrum or that continuum that I outlined earlier, but it does not replace any of the existing supports. Mentoring relationships with those who are already incorporating these strategies are hugely important. Faculty development groups that provide community support are hugely beneficial. And none of this replaces the need for institutional opportunities to learn, whether that's a workshop hosted by your university or institutional support to attend conferences like this one. I know this one is free, so it's not a big expense, but it still requires a commitment of your time to spend the day attending this conference instead of doing whatever other work is expected of you. So coaching is another tool to add to your toolbox to support those faculty who want to incorporate more equitable teaching strategies, but just haven't yet, no matter how many mentor groups and trainings and other supports you've offered. So there are resources available to help you learn how to use more of a coaching approach in working with other faculty. The really short and sweet version is stay curious, ask a lot of non-judgmental questions instead of giving advice. When you ask, why did you do that? That's not coaching. I mean, that's asking a question, but it's not coaching. It's putting them on the defensive. Coaching is really focused on as a safe space to explore what's going on and structured conversation to help figure out what each individual person needs to take that next step. For these topics, though, I highly recommend hiring an external coach. Discussing your fears, especially for these topics, can be really difficult to open up about, especially when it's somebody that you know you're going to see around campus and other contexts, possibly for years to come. Working with an external coach, it's a little easier to open up because you probably aren't going to be on a committee with them next year. If you worry that they are quietly judging you, you don't ever have to see them again. Whereas maintaining that non-judgmental curiosity, both in the session and, like, honestly, in the back of your head, when you're working with colleagues, it's challenging to trust that you're not actually being judged. With that, as I said, coaching is a completely unregulated industry. So anybody can call themselves a coach and put up a website and market themselves as such. When you're looking for a professional coach to work with, a couple of markers of quality are affiliation with a reputable coaching professional organization. The International Coaching Federation is kind of the gold standard among professional coaches. They offer accreditation for coaches at 3 different levels. You also have the Center for Credentialing and Education, and they have the board certified coach credential. And then if the person doesn't have a formal credential, ICF, you can have a membership, particularly if you are working toward your first credential. These programs also accredit training programs. So if you have, honestly, I'm a newer coach, I will be completing an ICF accredited training program at the end of May, and will be working toward gaining the hours of experience that it takes to apply for an initial credential from the ICF. You also want to look at their experience, their background, their knowledge of equity issues, of course. These are just some markers of formal coaching training, since again, anybody can also put together any kind of training they want and call it coach training. And that is all that I have. And this is the source for the survey that I mentioned before. And my information, if you have any questions, I'm always happy to talk. And I think we do have time for questions if you have any. And you are muted.
Maybe this is super helpful, and I can share this with the people who attended today once I have that list. But maybe stop sharing so people could see you, and people can do their camera. And this is a pretty small group. We're only 13 people, so I would encourage people just to go ahead and take turns unmuting themselves and asking any questions. There's one right now in the chat that said, have you seen or what are your thoughts on group coaching or as a facilitated process or facilitated process for this kind of system-wide change?
So it depends on the topic. In an individual coaching session, the benefit is you're only working with one person. So sometimes it's easier to open up about those like fears that you're really worried you're going to be judged for. The benefit of a group coaching session is it provides some community support. So just as a general idea, they both have benefits in different areas, and that community of support can be really valuable. But sometimes the one-on-one attention is going to let you open up at a deeper level.
So you haven't seen it be group coaching thus far. You guys haven't tried group coaching.
Not personally.
Okay. Karen, did you want to follow that up with any other specifics or questions?
No, I'm starting a program in May on facilitation, and I'm just trying to draw the difference or similarity between the approaches of facilitation and the approaches of coaching, and that seemed to be a place of overlap.
And there are pure coaches by the ICF definition that do group coaching sessions for building more mindful practices or getting clear on your priorities. And for those topics, the group coaching would look like the coach facilitator asking questions, and maybe you spend 5 minutes talking, exploring this person's issue, and then 10 minutes exploring that person's topic of the day. But then you also have that rich community. Oh, I had that same challenge too. So they definitely go hand in hand, and it depends on exactly what you're talking about. And there's also space to combine them. So you've got a group that meets once a month, and then maybe alternating weeks, group, and then individual, and then group, and then individual.
I will say, Karen, that so at the Peralta District, once we developed our rubric, we developed a 5-week training, originally a 6-week, down to 5-week training for people to go through and learn how to apply the criteria in their pedagogy. And the hardest one, of course, is people both acknowledge or seeing and being willing to acknowledge and perhaps address their own biases. which we all have. And there is a component that we struggle with about that often comes out in a dialogue. So when we're talking about biases, we ask people to acknowledge their own, some of them, and explain them. And our two facilitators and our TA will start with theirs. But there's an element that I feel like for us in many ways is lost in that sort of public domain. And this is all virtual training so far. That as I'm listening to you, Angela, I'm saying almost like we'd like to say, okay, you over here, you need to go work with Angela one-on-one for 5 weeks and then come back and take the class again or something, because the people who often need what it sounds like, Angela, you're talking about coaching are very often people with the very impediments that you have outlined today. So we'd like you to come and work with our team, Angela Peralta.
I would love to.
Are there any other participants that have specific questions for Angela, or maybe want to comment about how you and your institution address or support faculty across sort of impediments in moving towards stronger equity pedagogy?
I am seeing Karen also asked, are there specific philosophies or paradigms that one might look for if someone doesn't have those letters? The key would be to ask them how they define coaching and what it entails. One of the benefits of affiliation with these organizations is you have that clear framework, but there are also, I haven't earned the accreditation yet, but I have joined as a member, and part of that process is agreeing to a specific ethical code. So there is the cost barrier, but it's not like you have to have hundreds of hours of experience coaching before you can have the affiliation. And that the value I see in coaching for helping those folks in the middle move into active participation really depends on this definition as I outlined it instead of as other people use it, which there's value, right? Like, I'm not saying, oh, you're wrong, but this is a specific way of looking at it that addresses these specific problems in a way that it's harder to do in more mentoring type of relationships.
Okay, I'm using my best equity practices to allow long silences to make sure that if any of the participants would like an opportunity to say something, that they get the amount of time they need to jump in. So I'm going to ask one more time, are there any of y'all would like to make a contribution? Something you do, a question you have? And if not, what I'm going to do is say, Angela, for next year's Peralta Online Equity Conference, I hope you'll submit another proposal that will talk a little bit about how you may have or have not institutionalized coaching and what other institutions might be able to do to try to do that. Because that comes up at many of our sessions here at the conference. People say, oh my gosh, that's so wonderful. How the heck do you get that, your institution to launch it or do it or support it? So
I will say there are, I learned about, in my early process of learning about coaching, apparently there is precedence for hiring an external coach as a professional development. I started learning about this from people that hire book coaches to help them make progress on writing a book. So that is one way to get the institutional support on a one-by-one basis. It's not It's not the full framework, but it's a place to start.
Okay, I am going to thank Angela, Pashia. Thank you. You can see in the comments, people really appreciate this. Again, I hope you might come back next year and build on what you've done this year to the conference. And I'm going to go ahead and stop the recording.